going on, good people? If you hear me say nothing else over the course of the time we have together, hear my heart when I say thank you for the work that I know so many of you do each and every day to defend democracy and ensure that every member of our beautifully diverse community can get free. I'm really excited to talk more about Black Facts, what myself and our colleagues are calling some unique, one-of-its-kind research that we're extremely proud of. This research was engaged by 6 partner organizations. Those include NBJC, Family Equality, GLSEN, HRC, the LGBTQ Task Force. You're going to be hearing from their fearless leader today, as well as NCLR, the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And the 6 of us, national, openly, publicly Black queer leaders, commissioned a unique unicorn in the space, another Black same-gender loving man who's a researcher who leads hit strategies. You'll hear from Terrence in a bit, to ensure that we center Black people, an opportunity to turn down white noise and to center the experiences and feelings and thoughts that diverse Black people have about Black LGBTQ plus people and the policy issues that affect us. This won't be exhaustive. I want to make sure everyone knows that the deck and the data is available at nbjc.org/Black Facts right now. But we just wanted to provide a high-level overview, hopefully a little amuse-bouche to get you all excited about what it is that we have cooked and are cooking. To be clear, it's not over yet. Before I get into the data, I want to tap in one of my dear friends. We call each other twins. She's a sibling in the work of ensuring that we all get free. But I'm really honored that Angela Ra has joined us to talk a bit about why she thinks this research is important. Angela, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, DJ. And to those of you who I do not know, hello, family. It is a pleasure to be here and always to support the work of anything Dr. David Johns is a part of. As he said, we call each other twin. And so therefore, when twin calls, you answer. It doesn't matter what's going on. I'm also thrilled to precede Terrence Woodbury in this work, who you all will hear from later, from Hit Strategies. I've been following Terrence's work for some time. And remember when he was at the Brookings Institute, he is tremendous. And there just isn't a better pollster in this space, particularly because he doesn't just hit on the data, he will also explain it. And as you all know, given the election season that we are in, the election day that we're facing in November, you need to know the facts and you need to know how to talk about them. So I'm really grateful that you all are doing this. I think the other thing that's important to note is that, in the tradition of Black civil rights, the queer community has always been a central focal point of this movement, even in times where it's been silenced or it wasn't acceptable. And I think in 2024, where you all are still facing a significant amount of adversity, a significant amount of trial and tribulation, I think the one thing that we know is really important is ensuring that voices are heard from. We joked recently on my podcast, Native Land Pod, about how most times, unless Terrence is involved, Black folks don't really get polled. So shout out to y'all for knowing that the alliance, the allegiance, the coalition is important, because if we are not intentional about centering Black voices, particularly in this instance, Black queer voices, we won't be heard from at all. So I'm really, really grateful for this data. I'm grateful for the opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with these great gentlemen. And I'm so excited about what this will mean for Black people overall. David's shirt today says it all, and know that if I can be supportive in any way, I'm here to not only uplift this data, but to champion it and ensure that we all have our rightful seat at the table. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Twin, not only for that, but for all that you have done over the course of your illustrious career to, again, defend democracy and make sure that the challenges you enumerated no longer exist, so we can all experience joy and get free while centering equity. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you for doing this work weekly on Native Land Pod. I encourage everyone to subscribe, like, share, favorite. Do like my partner and I do, debate about it, listen to it. You can often choose a side, but just listen. When we listen, we learn. So again, thank you, Angela, for that. I want to talk a bit about the research at a very high level. I talked to you all about the partners who are responsible for producing it. Again, I'm really excited in a minute to make space for my sibling, Kiera Johnson, who leads the LGBTQ task force. And again, this is really important that we commission hit strategies and encourage you all to cite it, but let us know that you're doing so we can track it and support as well. Next slide. The objectives were for us to understand attitudes that Black people have, again, about Black LGBTQ people and the policy issues that affect us, to really see if we could identify messages that would move people to be more compassionate and more engaged in advancing policies connected to Black LGBTQIA plus people. And now we're at the phase where we're identifying messengers. I talked about some of the things that makes this research unique, and Angela hit upon this as well. But us centering Black people in a space where people don't tend to ask us questions makes this unique. We oversampled more than 13,000 Black people across the country. And then we intentionally oversample Black LGBTQIA plus people because often we are a footnote, which says that there haven't been enough of us engaged such that the findings are statistically significant, or that you can make generalizations. We're able to do that because we trusted HIT and we centered Black people. Let's go to the next slide. There are 6 key findings. I'm going to spend a bit of time in each of these and then get out of the way, but I really want to center the voices of some of the people that we engaged with. If you all leave with nothing else, know that Black people are often fed white supremacy lies that suggest that we are uniquely or singularly homophobic. That is not true. And in fact, our data shows that the plurality of Black people are supportive of Black LGBTQIA plus people and the policy issues that affect us most. Tom, will you play the audio?
The Black family is hypocritical because we talk about family, we love family, but then when a member comes out and say, I'm this or I'm that, all of a sudden we want to disown them. And even when we love to draw on the Bible, when within the Bible, it may not say Adam and Steve, but in the Bible, it's love thy neighbor. Love that family as you love yourself. And we're hypocritical because we don't live by that. So that's the issue within the Black community.
And again, want to highlight the percentages of people who totally agree that we should be doing more to support members of our beautifully diverse community. Next slide. A second key finding is that Black people are movable. What we found in our research is that Black people were categorized in 3 ways. One is active accomplices. Those are people that leverage their privilege, often in ways that make them uncomfortable, to ensure that we can all get free. The second group are passive allies, and those are people that understand the importance of being engaged, but might not necessarily have skin in the game. And the last category are the ops. And it's really important for me to underscore 2 things, which is that 1, the vast majority of Black people are in those first 2 categories, passive allies or active accomplices. There's a small percentage of us that self-identify as the ops. And then we'll talk a little bit later about what we've learned there when we dig into the data. The second thing is that Black people are movable. When exposed to compelling messages and data about the unique and often overlooked experiences of Black LGBTQIA plus and same-gender loving people, Black people move from each of these categories with increasing speed. Tom, please play this audio. Y'all, we should have started by prayer.
The consequences of broken families and individuals who are in society without the support structure that one would expect to have from a family backing you. So they're out there on their own.
And unfortunately, a lot of times when people are not accepted in their family, they are out on the street and they go into prostitution or drugs, and then a lot of them commit suicide, or they are beat up, harmed by other individuals.
One of the hypotheses that we wanted to test was this concept of shared fate or linked fate. What most of us know as Black folks or descendants of the diaspora, which is that something that happens to one member of our community affects all of us. And you'll see from the graphs on the right, 30% and then 33% of Black folks that we surveyed identify strongly with that sense of shared fate. And you'll hear that as a thread throughout the audio in a way for us to appreciate the importance of reclaiming African ways of being, of centering the Black community, and celebrating the strength that we have collectively. Next slide. Also, shout out to Tom, our producer, who's working through the versus spirit of Babyface on the back end to make all this work. Thank you. Key finding number 3, Black people's default is that all Black people are Black. One of the ways that white supremacy works is that when we then remind people that there are many of us, the plurality of us who have multiple marginalized identities, the default is that queer people are white. And so those dynamics come into play. And there's a strong correlation with how people think about whiteness or how whiteness is performed with regard to queerness that shows up throughout our work. What's important here is to underscore 2 of the highlighted data pieces, which is, this is connected to the top line. 86% of Black people nationally report having a feeling of shared fate and connectivity with other Black people. But when we introduce, again, reflections of white supremacy, things that are designed to divide us, that decreases to nearly half. 51% of Black people feel shared fate with Black LGBTQIA+ and same-gender loving members of our community. Tom, please play the audio.
I want to just get a couple of responses about that. Why would you characterize, why would you say that you have linked fate with Black people?
Because if you go into if you had, people stealing, even though you might go in the store and you're paying for something, but you have another Black person that might be stealing something, they think all Black people steal.
Okay.
That's what I was saying earlier. You're going to get stereotyped based on the behavior of somebody else just because you look like them.
Okay. What are some other reasons that everybody in the room feels like they have shared fate with other Black people?
Well, let's say they pass a law that Black people have to sit in the back of the bus, then I guess we'll all be sitting in the back of the bus.
Next slide. This, again, reflections of how whiteness works. For Black people who think that those of us who are trans, queer, and gender expansive lead with or perform our queer identities before our Black identities, when people have that belief, they're less likely to be supportive of us as a community or the policy issues that matter most to the whole community. I'll come back to that in a second. Tom, please play the audio.
So I feel like you're in like 2 different categories. And like, you're like, I get that you're Black, but you're also with the LGBT community, and they like take care of their own, as Black people also do mostly. So if you're like Black and LGBT, it's like you're in 2 different worlds. It's like you kind of have to pick a side.
Kind of on the fence a little bit.
Yeah, you're on the fence. You have to like, and a lot of people don't realize that, causes.
And so you'll see, in addition to thinking about how that plays out, including with people I imagine that when asked which part of one's identity do Black LGBTQ+ and same-gender loving people identify with most, one is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and or both. And so there again is this idea that for those of us who are open, are public about our queerness, we are not as embracing of our Blackness. I could extrapolate, but I won't. You'll have to download the Black Facts paper that'll be available next week to hear more about that. Next slide. Black unity, again, considering all of this goes back to one thing I said at the beginning, which is us turning down white noise. We will win when we continue to center Blackness and focus on our strength as a community and the importance of unity, a threat that's existed through the Black Power movement and movements since then. Our data affirms that. Taglines that were that resonated throughout our research were, if you're Black, and we're all a part of the same struggle. Again, this shouldn't be a surprise when you think about shared fate. Our linked fate as a concept that resonated with Black people across the country as well. Please play the audio.
The suicide, it's a big problem, but a lot of that stems, I think because people aren't accepting of them, and probably more than anything because their families aren't accepting of them, and we can impact that. I mean, you can't control what someone's sexual identity will be, even if it's your children. but you can't disown them because of that. And that's what's been happening. And that's why they're homeless and all these other things are happening.
Two things related to this. What you've heard in this is one, message points and statistics around young people and the increased rates of suicide amongst young Black people and young Black LGBTQIA plus people more specifically resonated throughout our research project. The second tagline that registered most with folks, our messaging rather than not tagline, was around the rate at which Black cis het women or Black straight women are affected by HIV. Again, troubling the myth that HIV is a Black gay disease or something that religious trauma might suggest is a crime that we deserve for being queer, trans, or gender expansive. All of that was wrapped up in our study. And then related to that, religiosity, no surprise to anyone who knows Black people, was very present throughout almost every conversation we had. And Black people acknowledge this contradiction of investing in a faith, one that white supremacists use to justify transatlantic Pacific enslavement and forms of subhuman bondage in perpetuity thereafter, but also to prevent us from being able to have conversations about the ways in which we're connected. And so those messages mattered. And then people were able to talk about how we should lean into these contradictions, these religious contradictions that celebrate family, but then would allow people to justify throwing away or not supporting a child to no fault of their own. Next slide. I talked about these percentages earlier. You'll see the data here, 29% active accomplice, 25% passive allies with high potential for folks that work in policy spaces. That's what we traditionally refer to as the movable middle. And then 35% of Black folks identify as the ops. Noteworthy for us, when we ask people, why do you identify as the ops? Why do you not prioritize issues connected to Black LGBTQIA plus people, they said two things. One is, there are other more important things for me to worry about. You heard someone reference earlier, they got it, right? Like we got ours, they got themselves. And again, this false belief that there's a space for those of us with intersectional identities outside of the Black community. There isn't, there has never been. The second part of this is religion. And so religious or spiritual objections or concern was also offered as the reason why 35% of Black folks we engage nationally self-identify as the ops. Let's play this audio.
People, we should all support each other. Mm-hmm. Even if we don't agree with what you do, I can still, don't want no harm to come to you. I want you to grow and just like anybody else. But as long as we stay these little divisions, we'll never be together as a community. Mm-hmm. Because every little thing that happens becomes, divide and conquer. So
next slide. Social proximity matters. Again, anyone who's a sociologist or thinks about the ways that people engage in community should not be surprised by this, but 40% of Black people we surveyed say that they have a family member who identifies as a member of the LGBTQIA plus or Liga-Biga-Tigger LGBTQIA community. 82% of Black people have some proximity or say they know someone who has invited them into their identity as a member of our community. And that's specific to people who are G, B, L, Q. When we ask specifically about trans and gender expansive members of our community, that drops to 42%. Again, to my early point about Black people not being more or uniquely transphobic or transmissive in this regard, that 42% is consistent with the national average. 42% of Americans across the country say that they have proximity to or know someone who is transgender or gender expansive. Please play the audio.
No, I was just basically saying, yeah, that's, always going to be the case. And you're definitely going to be impacted because, if it's someone in your family and it's someone that you, have a connection with, if something happens to that person, it's going to impact you no matter what their beliefs are or how, they, carry on their daily day life. It's going to have some type of impact on you because if someone in your family hurts, you're going to hurt as well.
Okay. Yep, you heard them naming the consequences of living at what our colleague named a lonely intersection. Next slide. So I'm going to pause here. Tom, you can take me off. And just again, highlight some top lines before I invite in my colleague, sibling and friend, Kiera Johnson, to jump in these double Dutch ropes. One is that there's a plurality of support. Don't believe the lie that we are homophobic, that we don't understand the value of community, and that before the terms lesbian and gay existed, we occupy beautifully diverse ways of being. That's one. The second is that we have shared values. There's no daylight between the things that Black LGBTQIA plus people value and the things that non-Black LGBTQIA plus people value. They're on the screen now. Fairness and equality, respect, and building generational wealth or opportunities to participate in this American dream that we built for free are things that matter to Black people, regardless of our sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression classification. Similarly, when people talk about the agenda, the LGBTQ agenda, and the Black agenda, when we ask specifically about the Black LGBTQ agenda and the Black agenda, they're the exact same. The things that we are most concerned about are healthcare. The second is cost, the cost of everything. The rent is too damn high. The cost of insurance is too damn high. The cost of living while Black is too damn high. And then the last thing is anti-Blackness, racism, and discrimination, reparations, equity, the things that NBJC and our partners spent last week leading into Juneteenth, centering through our Equity Week. Those are the things we value. And so we should not be tempted by the machinations of the media, who will continue to set us up to be blamed for whatever's going to happen in the upcoming presidential election cycle, or attempting to pit us against each other. There's no daylight between us when we think about our values and our policy priorities. And then the last thing in this moment is that discrimination is recognized. A plurality of Black folks understand that those of us who have multiple marginalized identities face unique forms of discrimination. People understand that that's an issue, and whiteness gets in the way. How people imagine our performance of identity without recognizing that all identities are performed gets in the way. That people default to thinking queer, trans, and gender expansive people are white gets in the way. That we don't have enough space to have more conversations about the subtle differences within our community that make us as beautiful and as fly as we are gets in the way. But none of this should stop us from centering Blackness and continuing to have conversations around how we engage in what Kiera calls protracted struggle. With that, I'll turn it over to Kiera.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be on here with you all. So much love to you, David, as always. And good to see you again, Terrence. I have so many things I want to say, but for those of you who do know me, I'm a chatty Cathy. But a couple of things. One, I want to kind of spotlight that this research, while it gives us a ton of information about how to engage Black people on these issues, right, is also important for any kind of organizing we're doing, right? Any kind of work we're doing, because right where Black people go, so goes the country. So these concepts around passive allies and active accomplices is really critical, right? Like as we're thinking about Black folks, but also how we're thinking about women, right? How we're thinking about queer people, how we're thinking about young people. It's to be in that polarized place of you're with us or against us doesn't really do us any justice. And again, it took a survey of Black people, for Black people, by Black people to kind of unearth that and it's something that I think we need to apply across the work that we need to do into this election and beyond. I'm really excited about what this research has kind of pulled the onion skins back on, right? So part of what's in the way is that passive allies are feeling isolated. They're feeling siloed. frankly, progressive movement leaders are often like, our righteousness is in the way, right? People don't feel like they can ask, quote, stupid questions, right? That there's not a seat at our table if they don't have it all figured out, right? And they're not 100%, 150% on board. And so it gives us data, right, about who we need to be as people in the community, right? Like, we need to turn down, in addition to the white noise, we need to turn down the righteousness, right? Like, and listen to where people are, because when we listen, they tell us, right? And one of the things that that we've been tracking is that the opposition messages, the propaganda, right, that is anti-LGBTQ, anti-Black, anti-woman, the purveyors of that are prioritizing Black media and Spanish speaking media, right? So again, there's a reason why, right, the opposition forces are targeting, right, our communities, because there's so much power there, right? Power in numbers, power in spending, right? Power in influencing. And so again, I think it's something for us to be paying attention to. Specifically, I think the religious piece of this is particularly interesting to the task force. We just did a landscape analysis that basically saw a decline in the number of organizations and the amount of money being spent on engaging progressive faith leaders and organizations to engage around issues of LGBTQ people, right, and cares, right, like what people care about, right, like how to address LGBTQ issues tend to, right, community within spiritual faith institutions, and so that's a place, right, again, that we can that we've got to address. Although fewer and fewer people identify with a specific religion, more and more people identify as spiritual. So there is something in that, right, cultural and spiritual, that I think we can tap into. And then finally, I'm really excited about the doors that this research could open into other research. I would love for us to dig deeper into what women are thinking, what we are saying, what is moving us from passive allies to active accomplices, straight women, queer women, cis women, trans women, non-binary folks, right? Like, let's get deeper into that as we're talking about gender, sexual orientation, and democracy, right? Particularly when Black women are being told, right, for better or for worse, that the fate of the country is on our shoulders, right? We should be really intentional about finding out where Black women are, right? What keeps us sustained in the work, and what can move us to active accomplice. So yeah, I think maybe another piece too is where are Black folks for whom English is not a primary language, right? The diaspora in this country more and more is speaking, right, Spanish and Tigrinya and Amharic, and so Arabic, right? And so what does that look like in terms of us building, right, not only language messengers, but also tactics and strategies. And so with that, queering the vote, right, ensuring that our people understand the power of the vote, but also understanding that the vote is one pathway to exercising our power, and figuring out how to connect them to the other issues they care about. Is it the environment? Let's figure out what are the local and state ways to be right, tuned into what's happening with environmental justice, right, and regulations. Is it education? Let's figure out what are the specific ways we can tie people to, connect them to what's happening at the school board level, or even at the PTA level. So I think we're in some ways, we're really lucky, right? Like, living in this democracy, there are multiple pathways to influencing, right, decision making and power. And while voting is one of them, I think we've got to be really intentional about meeting people where they are and where their passions lie, and having a real clear entry point to other places where they can exercise their power.
Yeah, to all of that. I was just giving space to let that breathe. and allow the spirit of our good sister, not bell hooks in this moment. It is bell hooks actually who in teaching critical thinking talks about the importance of remembering that democracy has to be defended with each generation. And so we're really proud of, again, our partnership. Kiara is representing the LGBTQ task force. I want to put a plug. Everybody should save the date. They're hosting their conference. It's the largest LGBTQ advocacy conference in the country. It'll be in Las Vegas, Nevada in January. And we invite you all to the Black Institute, where we'll be centering not only this data, but the conversation that Kiara sparked around using it to organize, using it as a tool to organize. Before we open it up for some questions, I want to invite in Terrence Woodbury, again, our partner in Angelic Trouble. Shout out to Bayard Rustin, for him to talk about everything connected to this, but specifically to also talk about some of the findings that we have very much connected to this week's presidential debate, and then findings connected to the presidential election cycle. To Kiara's point about the gender war, there is another war that we want you all to be mindful of too. Take it away, Terrence. You might be on mute, brother. See, Teddy Riley.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Johns, and all of our all the partners that have helped support this work. I'm so excited about this. This is just what I've been calling the FUBU research, for us, by us. That's not always how this work is commissioned. We often, we have to follow the lead of the folks that are paying for the research. So we don't get to ask some questions that we are extremely curious about. We don't get to pursue some lines of persuasion that we've been curious about, specifically around this intersectionality of Blackness and queerness. So I appreciate both the opportunity, but also the thought leadership that all of the partners have brought to this, along with the attitudes and the attitudes around linked fate and expanding that linked fate with the Black LGBTQI plus community. We also explored political attitudes around what Black folks more broadly are thinking about the upcoming election, because we would be remiss to have a sample size of 1,300 people without understanding who plans on voting and who they plan on voting for and what is motivating their votes. Because as we've seen from a lot of public polling, that underrepresents Black people and misrepresents our political attitudes. We've seen a lot of public polling claiming, upwards of 30% of Black folks are voting for Donald Trump, and Black people are unenthusiastic and not engaged and pessimistic and all kind of other attitudes that I believe misrepresent the actual political perceptions of our community. And so we dug in there, both in the focus groups and in the poll. We dug into these political attitudes, and there's a couple of things that we found that dispel what we've been hearing. Number one, around enthusiasm, that Black folks are disengaged and less enthusiastic. Well, according to this poll, 81% of Black people say that they plan on voting in the 2024 election. And this reminds me of a quote that I heard from a young brother in focus groups before the 2022 election, that that voting for him is like taking out the trash, that if he doesn't do it, then shit starts to stink around here. Well, that doesn't sound like enthusiasm, but it also sounds like that brother's going to vote. Right. And so this is where conventional polling is often just misrepresenting us. No Black folks are not enthusiastic about this upcoming election. We don't love the options. We don't love what's at stake. We don't like that our rights, our lives, and our freedoms are at stake here. But we also understand the assignment, and 81% say that they are going to vote. That is going to be overreported in public polling. But I can assure you in other polling that we have seen that that is much higher than we've seen from a lot of other groups. The other thing that we want to that this research dispelled is that Black folks are, in droves supporting Donald Trump. According to this research, again, a 1,300 sample size gives us enough of a sample size to break out groups of Black folks, not just Black men and Black women, but older Black men, older Black women, Black college, Black non-college, Black urban, Black rural. And what we see here is that while the gender gap persists, Black women remain 10% more likely to vote for Joe Biden than Black men. The generation gap has now grown between Gen Z and Boomers, is a 40-point gap. that Black baby boomers are 40% more likely. If you go to the next slide, one more, that one right there. You see here at the bottom, you'll see men and women. I gotta make this a little bit bigger. Okay, there we go. At the bottom here, you see 63% of Black men say if the election went today, they vote for Joe Biden. 67% of women say the same thing. But if you look at Gen Z and boomers at the top, the second liners are baby boomers. And then a few lines down are Gen Z. You'll see almost a 40-point gap between younger Black voters' support for Joe Biden and older Black voters' support for Joe Biden. The other thing that's important here is that the 35% of Black folks that are still that have not reassembled what I call the Black wall, Democrats' Black wall. We always talk about a blue wall in the Midwest. I believe it is a Black wall that has been anchoring and supporting and ensuring the success of Democrats. Well, that Black wall is beginning to erode, but it's not Donald Trump that's eroding it. It is Black folks are shopping. Black folks are pursuing options. And the number one reason why Black folks give us for their reluctance to either vote or vote for Joe Biden is that they don't believe that their lives have improved. More than 50% of Black folks said their lives have not improved since the 2020 election, which tells me that one, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So Black folks are shopping. And in the event that that Black wall is not reassembled, that we don't have 90% support for Black support for Democrats, then that is not Black folks' fault. The question is not what did Black people get wrong? The question is what are our politics getting wrong? Where a majority of Black folks say that nothing in their lives have gotten better or worse since the last election. And so we'll see in the upcoming debate this week in Atlanta whether or not they answer these very important questions, whether they can explain how Black people's lives have gotten better or will get better as a result of this upcoming election. Turn it back over to my brother, David Johns. I'm sure there may be some questions about this very robust data, and I assure you we've presented a fraction of it. So please dig into these slides and this data.
Yeah, before we do that, Tom, let's go to slide 41. One last point at the risk of it persnickety. And this again is acknowledging this upcoming debate and Terrence's point about Black people shopping for options. The same percentage of Black people are interested in the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West campaigns combined. That's a total of 9%. That's the same percentage of Black folks that say that they would vote for the Donald if the election were today. And so effectively what we've seen is white supremacy working through the two-party system to restrict the ability for these third-party or alternative candidates to be able to engage with the voting population. So again, want to highlight the ways in which Black people know this. We are woke. We understand these politics. And in spite of it, we still show up. One thing that Terrence shared in a interview we did was Black people understand the assignment. I added that we execute often in spite of knowing the assignment and that these institutions don't work for us the way that they should. We don't want to hear anyone asking questions about what more the Black community is going to do. It's time for those in power, often older white men and white racial actors like Nimrata, to answer questions about how they're going to be accountable and explain, including what they're going to do to improve the lives of Black voters who often are on the front lines of defending democracy. With that, again, want to highlight that all of these resources, including the deck, some key findings, and some articles highlighting the research are available at nbjc.org/blackfacts. If you or your staff would like for us to do a version of this presentation, happy to do that as well. We want to make sure that you can cite this data and use it in ways that are meaningful. But if saw there was a question about the disaggregation of data that I believe Terrence answered in real time, but we'll pause and open it up to see if there are other questions or interventions that our colleagues want to offer up in the 19 minutes we have left.
As a production note, we invite you to put your questions into the chat. They will then be displayed on screen so that our commentators may directly address them. And if you have a particular person that you would like to address your comment to, just please mention that in your comment so that they know that the question is being directed at them. Thank you so much.
Terrence N.A. Nelson asked, was the racial data disaggregated by ethnicity? Were some Black cultural groups more or less accepting of LGBTQ people in general compared to trans people?
Yeah, so David talked a little bit about the ops. The reason we called them that is because they quite literally self-identified as the ops. We asked the question, do you consider yourself a supporter or opposition of Black LGBTQ plus people? And then we gave a strong supporter, somewhat supporter, strong opposition, somewhat opposition. And around 30% of Black folks identify as opposition, rather strong or somewhat opposition. And that was pretty consistent throughout the survey. We asked this question many different ways. Do you think that Black people should do more to support Black LGBTQI folks? About 30% said no. Do you think you should do more? About 30% said no. Do you consider yourself opposition? About 30% say yeah. And so it was a very consistent third. And the ops. And look, I think that this is an opportunity for further research because the ops were quite hardened. Our messaging did not move them very much. Examples and stats of injustice against Black LGBTQI plus folks did not move them very much. But what did move was moving the passive allies, moving them towards action, which is what I think is the opportunity here, but also room for further research of how do we continue to chisel at that hardened opposition, most of which, to David's point, came from two reasons: either religious opposition or because they just felt that there were more important issues.
Yep. Are you able to break down the data based on geographic? Yes, Terry, you want to talk about this process as well?
Actually, David, can I just chime in here really quickly? So I also find the ops question an interesting one. So I did work in the abortion rights, reproductive health field for 20 years. And what was interesting is the number of people who identified as in opposition to abortion in a general way. But then when you asked questions that were different, that separated them, what they would do versus having the power to decide what other people can do, that's when you saw things break apart. So people would say, well, I wouldn't have an abortion, and these are the reasons. And then if you ask the question, do you support government? Would you vote to take away someone else's right to have an abortion? And they'd be like, no, no. And so it was interesting. There was a real disconnect between like this general, are you for or against? And then upon deeper analysis, what are you going to be active on? Right. And so I think that's, again, a really key place that we might want to be, we could potentially go deeper on in future research.
Yep. I appreciate that. Yes, most definitely. You'll see there are some areas identified in future research in the deck. Tom, if you could pull up slide 24, this illustrates the point that we're talking about now and also highlights disaggregation with regard to religion. There is a question that was raised, I believe, by Jamel Fletcher. Thank you for archiving and sharing our stories through Swerve Magazine about regional disaggregation. If you want to speak to that as well, Terrence.
Yes. So, a 1,300 sample size doesn't give us, while it is a larger sample than most public polls ever represent of Black people, it is not large enough to give us state by state level geographic specificity, but it does give us regions. And what we saw was that the Northeast region was significantly more, Black folks living in the Northeast region were significantly more accepting, were more likely to be in the active accomplices. And then the Southeast region were more likely to not over-index, but we're a little bit more opposition. And that is also where we saw the highest percentages and rates of religiosity and spirituality. There's a correlation there that we have to continue to dig into. I don't think it's a cause. I can't say that it's a causation that because of church, they are more opposed, but there is a correlation there that we have to continue to dig into.
Yeah, and opportunities to name religious trauma and to dig in with progressive faith leaders, including Reverend Carmarian Anderson, who I know joined us. They serve on NBJC's Black Trans Advisory Council and also works for HRC. The LGBTQ Task Force has recently launched a program to engage in conversations with progressive faith leaders in NBJC under the leadership of Sharon Letman Hicks. We love you and appreciate you, Sharon. Thanks for your investment in making this research possible. Also plays in that space. So I want to make sure that people know that we'll be tilling the soil in that area as well. And then you'll also all note on slide 6, to Terrence's point, focusing on the movable middle, that additional targets outside of that passive ally grouping include younger voters, women, older voters, and people in the Northeast region, as was mentioned. I'm scrolling to see if there are other questions. As a follow-up, data shared fate. I wonder if engaging respondents on policy issues, if they tie shared fate to any particular party or figure, or anything behind the policies. Terrence, you want to jump in here?
Can I get the last part of that question? There was something there about anti-LGBTQ laws.
Do they see the wave of anti-LGBTQ laws as connected to book bans or anti-CRT or anti-Black rollbacks against civil rights and voting rights? Are people able to make the connection?
That's a great question, Garen. Somewhat, I do think that some of that is the messaging. That's the opportunity for deeper research, right? Is because there is deeper messaging here. There were a couple of messaging threads that we pursued in the focus groups that we were not able to pursue in the poll, just because of real estate and because of some of the baselining that we had to do around Black attitudes towards Black LGBTQ folks. To be clear, there has been research done about Black people's attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people. That is different than Black people's attitudes towards Black LGBTQ plus people. And so we had to do a lot of that baselining, and which prevented some of the deeper message experiments that we wanted to pursue, that we will continue to pursue. But I do think that's an opportunity for further research.
Similarly, I think the response is going to be the same. The indomitable Sharon Letman Hicks is asking what were some of the why responses by LGBTQ people who stated that they would support Donald Trump. I don't think we asked the question with that level of specificity, but I know HIT does a number of projects in this space. So I want to just give you space to respond more generally. We love you too, Carmarian, Reverend Anderson.
Yeah, look, the number one, there has been an increase of Black support for Republicans, not just for Donald Trump, but for Republicans broadly. This is happening up and down the ballot. We saw candidates like David Perdue double his margins amongst Black men in Georgia. Candidates like, God, his name is slipping my mind, in North Carolina. But the increase of support, of Black support for Republicans, is not unique to Donald Trump. It's happening up and down the ballot. And the number one reason it is happening, while there are some social and some social conservative views that are resonating, the number one reason why we've seen this increase is that Republicans are spending money trying, right? And that's what we heard at the top here about where the targeting efforts, the anti-LGBTQ and anti-women targeting efforts that are targeting Black and Latino communities, that is a very recent phenomenon. This is a recent influx of investment and spending to not just attract Black and Latino people towards Republicans, but to turn them against social issues that are championed by progressives. And that investment, look, when you have about 33% of the electorate that is of the Black electorate that is rightfully cynical, that doesn't like either party, that doesn't like politics, that doesn't feel like the system has delivered for them, but that 33% is only heard from one party. When they start being presented with alternatives, whether those alternatives are Republicans that are spending to communicate with them or third-party candidates, they are going to be receptive to some of those alternatives. And that's what we see happening.
I want to add to that. That is true. And we also have to take some responsibility, because there's an answer in left of center organizing and movement building. What has come up over and over again is that people don't feel like left of center organizations, movements have space for them. Like, the righteousness that people are feeling from left of center organizations and movements is not like, there's a drumbeat around this, right? The right of center organizations are saying, hey, you don't have to believe everything we believe, but you're welcome here.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we get really hardlined, right? And I'm not saying, right, of course I'm overgeneralizing, but there's something very real about, if you aren't with us, we've gotten into this polarized way of being and doing. If you're not 150% with us, you're against us, and now you're active opposition.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how many of our grandmas would be able to get into any of our organizations or movements at this point, because some of the thing that comes out of Grandma Elisa's mouth, y'all, she'd be canceled on social media if she was on social media. So I do think, David, you mentioned this principled struggle is real. We have got to figure out how not to lead with the ego of we're right, and if you don't think like us, then screw you, or you're stupid, or you vote against, you're not voting in your best interest, or not worth engaging. But really listening to where people's fears are, where people are struggling. They might be with us at 56%, but they say the wrong pronoun, right? They might be with us 49% and are struggling with, where is the faith element here? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where can I get in? And so we've got to pay attention. Like, when we start cannibalizing, again, these passive allies, these people actually who don't need to be moved necessarily, they need to be engaged. And that's different. If they don't have a place at our table, they're going to look for another table, because belonging is a part of just our humanness. And so if another table is saying, hey, you don't have to believe everything, and we welcome you here, that's where they're going to go.
That's right. Oh, David, you're on mute.
The Lord wanted me to make space for you. Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Kiara's exactly right. And we've seen a lot of this in our research. And I often use folks that I talk to in focus groups anecdotally. But in this example, I use my father, right? Who votes in every election, has only voted for Democrats his entire life, who is a retired captain in the reserves, who cries every time he hears the national anthem, right? Who loves Jesus and loves his gay son. He's not ever going to introduce himself with his pronouns. It is never. He would more likely leave the room. He will respect you and whatever pronouns you choose to go by, to identify us, but he's not going to give his. And he still has to be welcomed in those rooms, or he's going to find other rooms that welcome him.
And this is why this data is so important to us, specifically Black queer leaders who are often in spaces with progressive read white colleagues who don't understand this dynamic, who might insist on everyone normalizing pronouns when for us, that's not our issue, right? We know how to talk to each other with respect in ways that don't signal the politics of respectability for whiteness. And so our hope is that, again, you all find value in having data that should supplement things that you all know naturally. Again, our natural orientation is to be in community. That's how we draw strength. Our natural orientation is to get closer to freedom. That's why white people made up a term, dryptomania, to try and convince us that we didn't know what we know naturally. And so our hope is that you all can find value in this data. If there are additional questions that it brings up for you, let us know. The third phase of this project is message testing. That's the phase that we are in now, using some of the messages and top lines that resonated with folks, specifically the passive allies in that middle group. We'll be testing those messages leading up to this current election cycle and season, acknowledging that every year is an election cycle and season. And again, as a C3 organization, all of the partners engaged in this work to increase education, not to endorse a specific candidate. And anyone who is defending democracy should be clear about the options. I want to say thank you to everyone who gave us the gift of your time. Again, please look for the deck. Come back next week to download Black Facts, the paper that's designed for those of us who don't speak in research terms. use the digital resources that are on our website as well, and let all of us and our staff and our teams know what we can do to be more supportive of each of you. Those who are not here include Kelly Robinson at HRC, Imani Rupert Gordon at NCLR, James Black at Family Equality, Melanie Willingham's Jagger at GLSEN. I'll let Kiera offer her final remarks, and then Terrence, brother, you'll get the last remarks before we close out.
I'm just really grateful to have an opportunity to partner with my colleagues in this way. This is groundbreaking. I think the goal, again, is to move this information and research far and wide. And like I said, too often they try to minimize our impact to being, right, only impactful within community, which it is. But what we are finding is so much bigger and applicable even beyond the amazing community of Blackness that we are in.
Thank you all so much for your interest in this work. Please do give it the spotlight and the legs that it deserves. Because of the how rare it is to collect these attitudes and opinions from Black people and from Black LGBTQ plus folks. This research is pretty evergreen, and so you should continue referencing it. Because we only put out a fraction of this research publicly, if there are questions about things that you do not see here, we might still have it. So please reach out to us. We could dig deeper into the crosstabs and even into some of the questions that we did not present here to inform your work and your storytelling. Thank you, Dr. Johns.
Thank you all. Let's all get free. Honored to be in the arena with you. Happy Juneteenth.